I'm Jack, 29 male. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend, Sophie, and I work as a senior financial analyst for a major corporation. For years, my life has been about careful planning, steady progress, and building a future on a foundation of hard work. I believed that if I just did everything right, things would fall into place. But I recently discovered that the one person who should have been proudest of my success was actually using it to build an elaborate trap, all in the name of family duty. This is the story of how I uncovered a years-long deception orchestrated by my own father and how I used my skills to turn his scheme back on him. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The email landed in my inbox at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The subject line was simple: "Congratulations." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had been working towards this for 3 solid years, countless late nights, sacrificed weekends, and a level of dedication that bordered on obsession. I clicked it open, and the words blurred together before finally snapping into focus. "We are pleased to offer you the position of Senior Financial Analyst, significant salary increase." Expanded responsibilities. I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. I had done it. That night, Sophie and I celebrated. We went to a small Italian restaurant we both loved, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles dripping wax into old wine bottles. We shared a bottle of Chianti and toasted to the future. "I'm so proud of you, Jack," Sophie said, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight. "You deserve this more than anyone I know." Her support was my bedrock. She had seen the grind up close, had brought me coffee at midnight when I was buried in spreadsheets, and never once complained. We talked about what this meant for us: a down payment on a house, maybe starting to plan for a real wedding instead of just talking about it. For the first time, those dreams felt tangible, within reach. The glow of that celebration lasted for exactly 2 days. On Thursday evening, my phone rang. It was my father, Martin. His tone was cheerful, but it had an underlying firmness that I knew all too well. It was the voice he used when he was about to ask for something. "Jack, my boy, I heard the good news. Your mother told me we need to have a proper celebration. The family this Sunday for dinner, don't be late." It wasn't a request, it was a summons. I agreed, of course. In our family, Sunday dinner at my parents' house was a non-negotiable tradition, a cornerstone of the life my father had meticulously constructed. I should have known something was off. My father rarely called me directly just to chat. He was a man of purpose, and every action had a motive. I spent the next few days with a low-level hum of anxiety in my stomach. I mentioned it to Sophie, who tried to reassure me. "He's probably just genuinely proud, Jack. He wants to brag about his successful son." I wanted to believe her, but a lifetime of experience told me otherwise. My father's pride always came with a price tag. Sunday arrived, and the atmosphere at my parents' house was thick with forced cheerfulness. My mother fussed over me, patting my cheek and telling me how handsome I looked. My younger brother, Leo, gave me a brief one-armed hug before retreating to a corner with his phone. Leo was the family's designated creative soul, a freelance writer who was perpetually between projects and perpetually short on cash. He was smart and talented, but he lacked discipline, a trait my father viewed with a mixture of pity and contempt. Dinner was the usual affair: my mother's pot roast, my father's pontificating about the state of the world, and my brother's sullen silence. After the plates were cleared, my father clapped his hands together. "All right, Jack, let's you and I have a chat in my study." This was it. The study was his throne room, the place where decrees were issued. We sat in his heavy leather chairs, a massive oak desk between us. He started with praise, laying it on thick. He talked about my work ethic, my ambition, how I was a true credit to the family name. I just nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "And then it did. Now that you're in a much better financial position," he began, steepling his fingers, "it's time for you to step up and fulfill your family duty." He paused for dramatic effect. "Your brother Leo is struggling. It's not his fault. The creative world is a difficult one. He's behind on his rent, and it's causing your mother and me a great deal of stress." I braced myself. I had helped Leo out before with a few $100s here and there, something I was happy to do. But my father's expression told me this was different. "I've been covering it for a while," he continued, "but it's not my responsibility anymore. It's yours. As the successful older brother, it is your duty to support him. I want you to start paying his rent, in full, every month." The air left my lungs. Leo's apartment was in a trendy, expensive part of the city. His rent was easily over $2,000 a month. My promotion was significant, but it wasn't a lottery win. Taking on that kind of expense would cripple my own financial plans. It would wipe out any extra income from the raise and then some. "Dad, that's a lot of money," I stammered. "Sophie and I were hoping to start saving for a house." His face hardened instantly. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, flinty disappointment. A house? You're thinking about a house when your own brother is on the verge of being homeless. What kind of man are you? This family takes care of its own. I didn't raise a son to be selfish. He launched into a lecture on loyalty, on sacrifice, on the sacred bond of blood. He talked about how he had sacrificed for his family, how his father had sacrificed for him. The words were designed to make me feel small, ungrateful, and profoundly guilty. He painted a picture of Leo, destitute and abandoned, all because I wanted a fancy new house. I felt sick. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. He was framing his demand not as a request, but as a moral imperative. To refuse would be to betray the very essence of our family. I tried to argue to suggest a more reasonable compromise, but he cut me off. There is no discussion, Jack. You will do this. You'll call your brother tomorrow and arrange it. End of story. He stood up, signaling the conversation was over. I walked out of that study feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. The joy of my promotion had been completely hollowed out, replaced by a crushing weight of obligation and resentment. I had climbed a mountain, only to have my father demand I carry his preferred baggage to the summit. The drive home from my parents' house was silent and heavy. Sophie, who could usually read my moods with unnerving accuracy, waited until we were back in our own apartment before she spoke. "What happened in there?" she asked gently, her hand on my arm. I sank onto the sofa, the plush cushions offering no comfort. I recounted the conversation in my father's study, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. His lecture on loyalty, the demand, the cold dismissal of my own life plans. I laid it all out. Sophie listened patiently, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. "He wants you to pay all of Leo's rent. Jack, that's insane. It's not just a little help, that's a massive financial commitment. It's completely unreasonable." I nodded, feeling a small spark of validation. That's what I thought, but the way he framed it, he made me feel like if I said no, I'd be the worst person in the world. "That's because he's manipulating you," she said, her voice firm. "He's using your sense of duty against you. You've always been the good son, the responsible one. He knows you'll feel guilty if you don't do what he wants." She was right. Since I was a kid, that had been my role. I was the one who got good grades, who followed the rules, who never caused any trouble. Leo was the free spirit, the one who was always forgiven for his missteps because he was finding himself. My father had cultivated these roles for years, and now he was cashing in on mine. We spent the next hour going over our finances. We looked at my new salary, our budget, and our savings goals. The numbers didn't lie. Paying Leo's rent would indefinitely postpone our dream of buying a house. It would mean tightening our belts significantly, cutting back on everything from vacations to simple nights out. It felt like a punishment for my success. "We could talk to Leo," Sophie suggested. "Maybe we can help him find a cheaper place or a roommate." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You don't understand. This isn't about helping Leo. This is about my father asserting control. If I go to Leo, my dad will see it as me going behind his back trying to shirk my duty. It'll make everything worse." This was a power play and I was the pawn. My father, a retired real estate developer, was a man who understood leverage better than anyone. He had built his career on it. Now he was applying those same principles to his own family, using emotional leverage to get what he wanted. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I avoided my father's calls, letting them go to voicemail. Each missed call felt like a small act of rebellion, but it also filled me with a twisting guilt. His messages were brief and passive-aggressive. "Jack, just calling to see if you've spoken to your brother yet. Your mother is very worried." I knew "my mother is worried" was code for "I am getting impatient." I tried to talk to Leo. I called him under the pretense of catching. Up, the conversation was awkward. He was vague about his work, talking about a few potential writing gigs that hadn't panned out. When I gently probed about his living situation, he became defensive. "Dad's helping me out for now," he said curtly. "It's fine." It was clear he had been coached. He knew about the plan, and he was either too embarrassed or too complicit to discuss it with me. I got the distinct impression that he felt entitled to this support, that he saw my success as a resource for the whole family to tap into. Why should he struggle when his older brother had just gotten a big promotion? The logic, from his perspective, was probably simple. The pressure mounted. I was sleeping poorly and my focus at my new job was suffering. The excitement of the promotion was gone, replaced by a constant dull dread. Sophie watched me with growing concern. "You can't let him do this to you, Jack," she said one evening as I stared blankly at the TV. "You have to say no." I knew she was right, but the thought of the ensuing fallout was terrifying. My father didn't handle rejection well. It would mean a family war with my mother caught in the middle, and I would be cast as the selfish, ungrateful villain. Finally, I cracked. After a week of relentless pressure, I transferred the money for Leo's rent into his account. The moment I hit confirm, a wave of self-loathing washed over me. I felt weak, defeated. I had betrayed my own future and Sophie's to appease a man who saw me not as a son but as a financial instrument. I told Sophie what I'd done and she didn't get angry, she just looked sad. Okay, she said quietly. What's the plan now? There is no plan, I admitted, feeling hollow. I'll just pay it for now. Maybe in a few months I can try to talk to Dad again. But I knew it was a lie. Once you yield to a bully, they don't back off, they just push harder. I had set a new precedent. I had accepted my role as the family ATM. That first payment felt like the first shovel of dirt on the grave of my own ambitions. I had chosen to be the good son, but in doing so, I felt like I had lost a fundamental part of myself. The guilt of potential refusal had been replaced by the very real shame of capitulation. The first few months of my new arrangement were grim. Every time the first of the month rolled around, I would perform the grim ritual of transferring a huge chunk of my hard-earned salary to my brother's bank account. Each transaction was a painful reminder of my father's control and my own weakness. The money, which should have been a source of pride and a tool for building my future with Sophie, had become a symbol of my subservience. Sophie was a saint through it all. She never once said, "I told you so." Instead, she helped me rework our budget, finding small ways to save money that didn't feel like we were completely sacrificing our lives. But the dream of buying a house was now a distant fantasy, a topic we consciously avoided because it was too painful. My relationship with my family grew strained. Conversations with my father were transactional. He'd call to confirm I'd paid the rent, offer a perfunctory good man, and then move on. He never asked about my job or my life. I was fulfilling my function and that was all that mattered to him. Leo, for his part, seemed to have no problem accepting the money. He'd send a brief THX text and that was it. There was no gratitude, no acknowledgement of the sacrifice I was making. He was living in a nice apartment in the city, pursuing his art, funded by my 60-hour work weeks. Resentment began to curdle inside me, a toxic brew of anger and helplessness. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon in late autumn. My parents were having some work done on their house, a small extension on the back. My father, being the meticulous and controlling man he was, kept all his old business and property files in a series of filing cabinets in the basement. The construction required moving some of those cabinets, and he called me, asking if I could come over and help him shift them. "Your brother's back is acting up," he said, a subtle dig at Leo's avoidance of any physical labor, so I went. The basement was musty and cluttered, a graveyard of forgotten furniture and decades of accumulated stuff. The filing cabinets were heavy industrial-grade steel units. As we were maneuvering one of the larger ones around a support beam, my hand slipped. The cabinet tilted precariously, and with a loud crash, the top drawer slid open and then came completely off its runners, spilling a cascade of files and folders all over the dusty concrete floor. "For God's sake, Jack, be careful," my father snapped, his face instantly flushing with anger. "Those are important documents." He immediately knelt, his movements stiff and agitated, and began snatching up the scattered papers. "Just go upstairs and get me a drink," he ordered, clearly wanting me out of the way so he could reassemble his precious files in private. His panicked reaction struck me as odd. They were just old business records, weren't they? But I did as he asked, heading upstairs to the kitchen. As I was getting him a glass of water, I noticed a single sheet of paper stuck to the bottom of my shoe, picked up from the floor downstairs. I peeled it off, intending to take it back down to him, but before I did, my eyes scanned the page. It was a property tax statement. My analyst brain, trained to scan and absorb financial data in seconds, immediately picked out the key details. It was for an apartment building on a street I recognized. The owner was listed not as Martin, but as a corporate entity, Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. Curiosity piqued, I took a quick photo of the document with my phone before heading back down to the basement. I handed my father his water and the stray paper. He snatched it from my hand without looking at it and stuffed it into a folder. "Thanks," he grunted, his attention still focused on organizing the mess. "You can go now, I can handle the rest." He was clearly eager to get rid of me. On the drive home, my mind kept replaying the scene. His panic, his dismissiveness, the name of the LLC. It felt like a loose thread on a sweater, and I couldn't resist the urge to pull it. When I got back to my apartment, I sat down at my computer. Sophie was out running errands, so I had the place to myself. I pulled up the photo of the tax statement, then I did a quick search for the address of the apartment building. My stomach dropped. It was the address of my brother Leo's apartment building. My heart started pounding. It had to be a coincidence. It was a large building, maybe my father just owned a different unit in it, but he was a retired real estate developer. He didn't just own single units, he owned entire properties. I started digging. Using the research skills I'd honed at my job, I went to the state's corporate registry website and looked up Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. The filing documents were public record. I downloaded the PDF of the original Articles of Organization, and there it was in black and white. The registered agent and sole managing member of the LLC, Martin, my father. I leaned back in my chair, the world tilting on its axis. My father owned the entire building my brother lived in, the building he was forcing me to pay rent on. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. He wasn't covering Leo's rent. Leo was living in one of his father's own properties. The money I was transferring every month wasn't going to some anonymous landlord. It was going directly into my father's pocket. He hadn't just asked me to support my brother. He had created an elaborate scheme to transfer money from my bank account to his, using my brother as a pawn and my sense of family duty as the weapon. The feeling of sickness from that first conversation in his study returned, but this time it was mixed with a cold, clear rage. It wasn't about loyalty. It was never about family. It was a scam. The initial shock of the discovery was like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. I stared at the computer screen at my father's name on the LLC documents and felt a profound sense of betrayal that was so deep it was almost disorienting. Every lecture about family, every guilt trip about my duty was a calculated lie. He wasn't just manipulating me, he was defrauding me. My father, the man who preached about honor and integrity, was running a grift on his own son. The cold rage that had started to simmer now began to boil, but I knew that rage alone wouldn't solve anything. Martin was a man who dealt in facts, figures, and leverage. If I was going to confront him, I couldn't do it with just emotion. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed a complete picture of his deception. My professional life had been spent untangling complex financial structures for my company. Now I was going to apply that same skill set to my own family. My apartment became my war room. I told Sophie everything that night. She sat beside me at the computer, her initial shock turning into a quiet fury that matched my own. "That's not just manipulation, Jack," she said, her voice dangerously low. "That's theft. He's stealing from you." Her validation was the fuel I needed. She wasn't a voice of caution telling me to let it go for the sake of peace. She was my partner, and she was just as invested in seeing justice done. My investigation began with Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. One property wasn't enough to build a case on. I needed to know the full extent of his holdings under this corporate veil. I started with the County Property Assessor's online database. A search for the LLC name brought up a list of 6 properties. To my surprise, 5 of them were residential apartment buildings, all in decent middle-class neighborhoods. The 6th was a small commercial strip mall. He hadn't just retired, he had a significant portfolio of income-generating properties quietly managed through his LLC. This wasn't some minor side project. This was a substantial business. Next, I needed to connect the money flow. I couldn't prove that my rent payments were ending up with him without seeing the bank records, which was impossible. But I could build a powerful circumstantial case. I started with Leo. I knew the name of his bank from the transfer details. A quick search revealed that the apartment building's management company, the one listed on the building's directory, offered an online portal for tenants to pay rent. I created a dummy account pretending to be a prospective tenant to see the payment options. The portal allowed for direct bank transfers to an account at that same bank. The recipient was, of course, Oak Ridge Properties, LLC, so Leo wasn't even an intermediary. He was likely just transferring the money I sent him directly to another account controlled by our father. It was a clean, simple, and utterly despicable pass-through. But I needed more. This scheme felt too well orchestrated to be a recent invention. Had he done this before? Was I the first one to be tapped as a source of revenue? My mind went back years. I remembered conversations about my cousin Sarah, who had lived in one of my father's old properties for a few years after college. At the time, my father had praised her parents, my aunt and uncle, for stepping up to help her with rent while she got on her feet. My blood ran cold. Was it possible? I went back to the property records. I found the address where Sarah used to live. Unsurprisingly, it was one of the buildings owned by Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. This wasn't a one-time scheme targeted at me, it was a business model. He used his properties as a way to extract money from his extended family, laundering it through the guise of family support. He would place a struggling relative in one of his buildings, then pressure a more successful family member to pay the rent, which flowed directly back to him. He got to look like the concerned patriarch facilitating help while secretly profiting from the entire arrangement. The sheer cynicism of it was staggering. He wasn't just a manipulator, he was a predator hiding within his own family. The final piece of the puzzle was the rent itself. Was he charging Leo the market rate? I went on to several apartment rental websites and searched for comparable units in Leo's building and the surrounding area. The number was clear. The $2,200 I was paying every month was not only the market rate, but it was on the higher end of the spectrum. He wasn't even giving his own son a discount. He was charging the full price, creating the illusion of a real, arm's-length transaction with a third-party landlord. This detail was perhaps the most galling. He wasn't just asking me to cover a cost, he was ensuring he made a healthy profit margin from it. Over the course of a week, I compiled my findings into a meticulous dossier. I printed out the LLC registration documents, the property tax records for all 6 buildings, screenshots of the market rate rent comparisons, and a detailed flowchart that mapped the movement of money from my account to his. Every document was a nail in the coffin of his deception. Holding the completed file in my hands, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but it was now focused. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the analyst who had uncovered the fraud. The power dynamic had shifted. He thought he held all the cards, but I was holding the truth, and I knew exactly how I was going to play my hand. With the dossier complete, a heavy stack of irrefutable proof sitting on my desk, the question was no longer what had happened, but what I was going to do about it. My first instinct was pure, unadulterated rage. I wanted to drive over to his house, throw the papers in his face, and watch his carefully constructed world of lies crumble. Sophie, ever the voice of reason, calmed me down. A direct confrontation will just be a shouting match, she said calmly. He'll deny, deflect, and gaslight you. He'll turn it around and make you the bad guy for snooping into his private affairs. You can't just present the evidence, you have to stage it. She was right, my father's greatest weapon was his control over the family narrative. In a one-on-one fight, he would use his authority and my mother's loyalty to isolate me. If I was going to do this, I needed an audience. I needed to dismantle his narrative in front of the very people he sought to control. The perfect stage for this revelation already existed, the traditional Sunday family dinner. It was his theater, the place where he performed his role as the benevolent patriarch. It was only fitting that I should use his own stage to pull back the curtain. So we began to plan. The first step was to stop the bleeding. The first of the month was approaching and another rent payment was due. This time I didn't make it. I simply let the day pass. It took less than 48 hours for the phone to ring. It was my father. His voice was tight with controlled annoyance. Jack, I just spoke with Leo. His rent hasn't been paid. Was there a problem? I feigned ignorance and panic. Oh my God, Dad, I'm so sorry. Things have been crazy at work with this new role. It completely slipped my mind. I'll handle it right now. The lie felt surprisingly easy. I was learning to play his game. See that you do, he said and hung up. I of course did not handle it. A few days later, another call. This time he was less patient. Jack, Leo got a late notice. What's going on? I laid the next piece of the trap. Dad, I'm so sorry, but I have to be honest. I'm having some cash flow issues. This new tax bracket is hitting me harder than I expected, and Sophie and I have some unexpected expenses. I'm really struggling to make this work. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. This was a complication he hadn't anticipated. My role was to be the successful son, the endless well of cash. My financial struggles undermined the entire premise of his scheme. What do you mean struggling? He demanded. You just got a massive raise. I know, I said, my voice full of practiced shame. I feel terrible. I'm letting you and Leo down. I don't know what to do. I let the silence hang in the air before delivering the master stroke. Listen, I was thinking maybe we could all talk about it. Maybe if you and I and Leo sat down with the landlord, we could work out some kind of payment plan. If the landlord understands the situation, maybe he'd be willing to give Leo a temporary break. It would be a huge help. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I had him. He couldn't possibly agree to a meeting with the landlord because he was the landlord. To refuse would be to admit he didn't actually want to solve the problem, only to have my money. He stammered for a moment. No, that won't be necessary. We don't need to involve third parties. This is a family matter. But they are involved, Dad, I pressed, twisting the knife. They're the ones sending the late notices. I just feel like if we could all be transparent, we could find a solution. No, he said, his voice sharp, almost panicked. Let me handle the landlord. You just get me the money as soon as you can. He hung up abruptly. I smiled, checkmate. The final step was to set the date. A few days later, I called my mother. I told her I had some great news and wanted to celebrate with the family. I've sorted out my financial issues, I lied brightly. And I want to do something special to make up for the stress I've caused. I'd like to treat everyone to a special Sunday dinner. I'll have it catered from that nice place you love, Mom, my treat. She was overjoyed. A catered dinner was a luxury we rarely indulged in. She immediately agreed and said she would tell everyone. This was crucial. By paying for a fancy dinner, I was reinforcing the narrative that I was back on my feet, the successful and generous son once again. It would lull my father into a false sense of security. He would assume his pressure tactics had worked, that I had fallen back in line, and that his income stream was secure. He would walk into that dinner expecting to be praised, to sit at the head of the table and enjoy the fruits of my labor. He would have no idea that he wasn't the guest of honor. He was the subject of the main event. Sophie and I spent the week preparing. We went over the plan, role-playing the conversation. I made 5 copies of the dossier, one for me, one for my father, one for my mother, one for Leo, and a spare. Each was neatly bound in a black report cover. The stage was set. The actors were in place. All that was left was for the curtain to rise on the Last Supper. The aroma of roasted chicken and garlic mashed potatoes filled my parents' home, a stark contrast to the icy tension coiling in my stomach. The catered food was laid out beautifully on the dining room table, a feast designed to signal celebration and prosperity. My mother was beaming, thrilled by the gesture. Leo seemed unusually cheerful, likely relieved that his financial pipeline was apparently secure again. And my father, Martin, sat at the head of the table, radiating a smug satisfaction. He had won. His difficult son had been brought to heel and was now paying tribute. He raised his wine glass. "To Jack," he announced, his voice booming. "To his success and to his commitment to this family, we're all very proud." Leo and my mother echoed the toast. I just smiled, a tight, humorless expression, and took a sip of my wine. The irony was so thick I could taste it. We ate, making small talk. I let them control the conversation, answering questions about my job with vague pleasantries. I was a coiled spring, every nerve ending buzzing with anticipation. Sophie sat next to me, her presence a silent source of strength. She would occasionally meet my gaze, giving a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We were a team. When the main course was finished and my mother stood to clear the plates for dessert, I said, "Mom, please sit down, let that wait a bit." She looked surprised but obliged. I took a deep breath. "Showtime." "Actually," I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the comfortable chatter, "there's a reason I wanted to bring us all together tonight. It's related to the commitment to family that Dad just mentioned." I reached under my chair and pulled out the 4 bound dossiers I had placed there earlier. I slid one across the table to my father, one to my mother, and one to Leo. I kept the last one in front of myself. "What's this, Jack?" my father asked, his brow furrowing in confusion as he picked up the report. "A little light reading for after dinner." "You could call it that," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "It's a financial analysis I've been working on. I thought as a family we should all be on the same page about our financial arrangements. Please open it." My mother and Leo opened theirs with curiosity. My father, however, hesitated. He looked from the report cover to my face, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He opened it slowly. The first page was a copy of the Articles of Organization for Oak Ridge Properties, LLC, with his name clearly listed as the sole member. I watched his face. The smug satisfaction drained away, replaced by a pale, waxy shock. His eyes darted down the page, and then he quickly flipped to the next one, the property tax record for Leo's building. "Jack, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. It was thin, strained. My mother and Leo were looking at the documents with utter confusion. "Mom, Leo," I said, drawing their attention. "What you're looking at are public records. They show that Dad is the sole owner of a company called Oak Ridge Properties. If you turn to the next page, you'll see a list of properties owned by that company. You might recognize one of them, Leo. It's your apartment building." Leo's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What?" He flipped through the pages frantically. My mother looked at my father, her face a canvas of disbelief. "Martin, is this true?" My father slammed his report shut. "This is a private business matter. Jack, you have no right to go digging into my personal finances. This is an outrageous invasion of privacy." "Is it an invasion of my privacy when you demand I pay rent to a company you secretly own?" I shot back, my voice rising with controlled fury. "You didn't ask me to help my brother. You conscripted me into a fraudulent scheme to enrich yourself. You lectured me about family loyalty and duty while systematically transferring my salary into your own bank account." I opened my copy of the dossier and turned the pages for my mother and Leo to see. "Here's the market analysis. Leo, he's not even giving you a family discount. He's charging you, or rather me, the full top-end market rate. Every month, I've been paying $2,200 directly into Dad's business account. So far, that's $13,200 I've paid him since my promotion." The room was silent except for the frantic rustling of paper as Leo and my mother absorbed the evidence. Leo looked utterly stunned, as if he was seeing our father for the first time. My mother just stared at her husband, her eyes filling with tears. "Martin, why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" My father's face was a mask of fury. He was cornered, exposed, and he did the only thing he knew how to do. He attacked. "He's twisting things. It's a complicated financial structure for tax purposes. The money was for Leo. Jack, you are an ungrateful, selfish boy. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. by trying to turn this family against me. Done for me, I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You've done nothing but try to control me. You saw my success not as something to be proud of, but as a new resource to be exploited. And this isn't the first time, is it? I looked at my mother. Remember when cousin Sarah was living in that old property of Dad's, and you told me how wonderful it was that my aunt and uncle were helping her with rent? Well, turn to the last page. Dad owns that building too. This is his business model, using family members as pawns to siphon money from other family members. It's not about family, it's fraud. That was the final blow. My mother let out a small sob. Leo threw the dossier on the table in disgust. So all that time you were just using me, he said to my father, his voice cracking. You made me think Jack was helping me, but you were just using both of us. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was purple with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You have ruined this family. He hissed, get out of my house, both of you, he added, glaring at Sophie. I stood up calmly. Gladly, I said, but know this, I will never give you another cent. The family ATM is officially closed. Sophie and I walked out, leaving the wreckage of his lies scattered on the dining room table behind us, the expensive catered meal growing cold. Walking out of my parents' house that night felt like stepping out of a suffocating room into the clean, cold night air. The immediate aftermath was a deafening silence. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing from my father. I knew he was likely trying to do damage control, to spin a new narrative for my mother, but the evidence I had presented was too stark, too damning to be easily explained away. The silence was not peaceful. It was the tense quiet of a battlefield after the first major engagement, with both sides regrouping. During that time, Sophie was my rock. We talked for hours, unpacking the years of subtle manipulation and control that had defined my relationship with my father. It was painful but also liberating. For the first time, I felt like the fog had lifted. The first person to break the silence was Leo. He called me one evening, his voice hesitant and full of a shame I had never heard from him before. Jack, I'm so sorry, he began. I had no idea. I mean, I knew he was helping with the rent, but I never thought, I just assumed it was him being a dad. I never questioned it. He sounded genuinely remorseful. I've been a freeloading idiot, he continued. I let him and you take care of me, and I didn't even appreciate it. After you left that night, he tried to tell Mom it was all a misunderstanding, but she wasn't buying it. They've been fighting ever since. He told me he was moving out of the apartment at the end of the month. He had already found a room to rent in a shared house on the other side of town, a place he could actually afford with the money he made from the occasional writing gig. It's time I grew up, he said, and for the first time I believed him. It was the first real step he had ever taken towards true independence. We talked for over an hour, more honestly than we had in our entire adult lives. The resentment I had harbored towards him melted away, replaced by a tentative, fragile sense of brotherly connection. The scheme my father had designed to use us against each other had, ironically, finally brought us together. My mother called a few days later. She was crying. She apologized for being blind to my father's behavior, for enabling him for so many years. I always knew he was a difficult man, Jack, she confessed, but I never believed he was a dishonest one, especially not with his own children. She told me that she had given him an ultimatum. He had to apologize to me, and more importantly, he had to pay me back the $13,200 he had taken from me. This I knew would be the true test. A week later, my father called. His voice was clipped and cold. There was no warmth, no remorse. Your mother has insisted I call you, he said, as if the words were being dragged from him under duress. She thinks I owe you an apology. He paused, and I waited. The silence stretched. I am sorry that you felt the need to blow up this family over a simple misunderstanding, he finally said. It was the most insincere, backhanded apology I had ever heard. He was incapable of admitting fault. He was the victim, I was the aggressor. Is that all? I asked quietly. Your mother also mentioned you would be paying me back, I added, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to see if he was capable of a single act of genuine accountability. He scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. You gave that money to support your brother. It was a gift, a family obligation you fulfilled. I'm not giving you anything. And that was it. That was the moment I knew for certain that our relationship was over. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. He felt no guilt, no shame. He believed he was entitled to my money, my respect, and my obedience regardless of his actions. Okay, Dad, I said, a strange sense of peace settling over me. Thank you for making this so clear. I hung up the phone before he could reply, and then I blocked his number. Life has changed since that last supper. I have no contact with my father. My mother still sees him, they are still married, but her relationship with him is fractured. She calls me and Leo regularly, meeting us for lunch or coffee without him. She is slowly building a life for herself outside of his shadow. Leo is thriving. He's working 2 part-time jobs to support his writing, and he's more focused and driven than I've ever seen him. He's paying his own way, and the pride he takes in that is immense. We talk almost every day. We're building a real relationship, one based on mutual respect, not forced obligation. As for me and Sophie, we are finally saving for our house, with that huge monthly expense gone. Our savings account is growing faster than we ever thought possible. Our future is our own again. Severing ties with my father was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but it was also the most necessary. I learned that family is not an excuse for abuse or exploitation. True family doesn't demand your loyalty, it earns it. It doesn't use guilt as a currency. It's built on a foundation of trust, honesty, and mutual respect. I lost a father, but I gained a brother. And I finally learned how to define family on my own terms.